Dusty light filtered through the grimy windows of the Frontier Cafe in Copper Creek, Colorado, 1875. The shadows crept across the wooden floorboards as Nellie Edwards wiped down the countertop for what felt like the 100th time that day. At 22, with honey blonde hair often escaping her practical bun and eyes the color of a summer sky, Nellie had spent 4 years serving meals to miners, travelers, and cowboys passing through. Her pale blue dress, faded from too many washings, hung a little loose on her slender frame. "More coffee?" she asked a table of trail-weary men, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ain't you just the prettiest thing in this whole territory?" one of them slurred, reaching for her wrist. Nellie deftly stepped back, having mastered the art of avoiding wandering hands. "Just doing my job, sir." Life had taught Nellie one hard lesson. In the untamed West, a woman alone was just waiting to be hurt. After losing her parents to illness 3 years ago, she'd learned to keep her head down, work hard, and expect nothing. Dreams were luxuries for people with safety nets. Love was a fairy tale that ended in disappointment or worse. The frontier demanded survival first. Happiness wasn't part of the bargain. The cafe's bell jingled as another group of cowboys entered, trail dust still clinging to their clothes. Nellie grabbed menus without looking up. Her goal was simple: earn enough to buy a small plot of land where she could be self-sufficient and, most importantly, alone. Relying on others only led to heartache. "Nellie, these boys just rode in with the Mitchell herd," called Otto, the aging cafe owner. "Give them our best table." With practiced efficiency, Nellie led them to the corner table, still not really seeing them as individuals, just more hungry men passing through her life temporarily. She'd learned not to notice faces too carefully. People always left Copper Creek eventually, just like they'd left her. "What can I get you gentlemen?" she asked, pencil poised over her notepad. "Well, miss, I believe I'm hungry enough to eat half the menu," said a voice that somehow cut through her practiced indifference. Nellie looked up then, truly seeing one of the cowboys for the first time. He couldn't have been more than 25, with kind hazel eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His face was freshly shaved save for a light stubble along his jawline, and his dark brown hair curled slightly where it peeked out from under his hat. Unlike the others, he removed his hat when addressing her. "I'm Matthew Harding, trail boss," he said, extending a hand that was calloused but clean. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am." The simple courtesy startled her, and Nellie found herself taking his hand briefly before remembering herself. "The special today is beef stew," she said, retreating behind professional distance. "Perfect for a cold day like today," he replied with a genuine smile. "And coffee for all of us, please." Something about his manners and the respectful way he looked at her, not through her or at parts of her, left Nellie feeling unsettled long after she delivered their order. It was easier when cowboys treated her poorly. Their crudeness justified her walls. The Mitchell cattle drive settled in the valley for the week, which meant Matthew Harding and his crew became regulars at the cafe. Each day, he greeted Nellie by name, asked about her day, and thanked her sincerely. He tipped generously but discreetly, always making sure she received it directly. On the third day, as a late afternoon lull hit the cafe, Matthew lingered after his men had left. "Miss Edwards," he said as she cleared the table, "I noticed you've been on your feet since dawn. Don't you ever take a break?" Nellie stiffened. "I'm fine, Mr. Harding. Work doesn't mind if I'm tired." "Well, perhaps it should," he said, helping her gather plates despite her protest. "You know, where I come from in Missouri, my mama taught us that everyone deserves rest, especially those who work hardest." "Your mother sounds like a dreamer," Nellie replied, the words coming out harsher than intended. Matthew wasn't offended. She was. "Taught me that dreams are what keep us going through the hard times." He paused, studying her face. "When was the last time you sat down to eat a proper meal, Nellie? Not standing in the kitchen between customers or eating scraps at the end of the night." The question caught her off guard. She couldn't remember. "That's what I thought," he said softly. "You spend all day waiting on others. Maybe sometime you'd allow someone to wait on you for a change." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and left, leaving Nellie staring after him, a strange flutter in her chest that she immediately tried to suppress. That night, as she lay in her small room above the cafe, Nellie couldn't stop thinking about Matthew's words. Who did he think he was, suggesting she needed taking care of? She'd been taking care of herself just fine. Depending on someone else's kindness was the quickest path to disappointment. The next morning brought unexpected chaos. A stage had arrived overnight, and the cafe was overwhelmed with travelers. Otto was moving slowly, his arthritis particularly bad in the damp spring weather. As Nelly rushed between tables, a drunk miner grabbed her roughly, pulling her onto his lap. "Come on, sweetheart, take a load off," he leered, his breath foul with whiskey. "Let me go," Nelly said firmly, trying to extract herself without causing a scene. "Don't be like that." Suddenly, the pressure was gone. Matthew Harding stood beside them, his hand firmly on the miner's shoulder, expression calm but eyes hard as steel. "The lady asked you to let her go," he said quietly. "I suggest you apologize and return to your meal." Something in his steady gaze made the miner mutter an apology and release Nelly. Matthew stepped back, not making a show of heroics, simply nodding to her once before returning to his table. When the morning rush finally subsided, Nelly brought Matthew a slice of apple pie he hadn't ordered. "Thank you," she said simply, placing it before him. "But I don't need rescuing." He looked up, those hazel eyes thoughtful. "No, I don't believe you do, Miss Edwards. But even the strongest among us could use an ally now and then. An ally, not a savior or a protector." The distinction stirred something in Nelly she'd long tried to bury, a longing for connection that didn't come with strings attached. The following day, Nelly was surprised to find Matthew at the cafe's door before opening time, holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Mr. Harding?" "Morning, Miss Edwards. I was hoping to make a trade. These are fresh biscuits my trail cook made. Man's a wizard with a Dutch oven. Thought you might enjoy them with your morning coffee, before the rush." Nelly hesitated, then accepted the bundle. The biscuits were still warm. "Thank you, but no strings," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Just a kindness between neighbors." "We're hardly neighbors," she said, but found herself smiling slightly. "Well, for this week we are. Good day, Miss Edwards." He tipped his hat and walked away. That evening, as Nelly served the Cowboys their dinner, she noticed Matthew studying a tattered map with his foreman, their expressions concerned. "Problem with the trail?" she asked, setting down a plate of fried potatoes. Matthew sighed. "Weather's turning. Got word the North Passage is flooded out, and taking the southern route adds 3 weeks to our journey. Cattle are already thin, and we're working with tight margins this season." For the first time, Nelly saw weariness in his face. She'd been so caught up in her own struggles, she'd forgotten everyone carried burdens. "There's an old mining trail," she found herself saying, "through Crawford Pass. It's not on most maps, but locals use it. Cuts 2 days off the journey to Junction City." Matthew looked up, hope kindling in his eyes. "You're certain?" "My father used it when he was alive. I could—" She hesitated, then committed. "I could show you the starting point tomorrow, if you'd like." His smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "Miss Edwards, that would be a true blessing." The next morning, Nelly found herself on the back of Matthew's horse, directing him to the hidden trail entrance 5 miles outside town. She hadn't ridden in years, and the solid warmth of him behind her, arms reaching around to hold the reins, made her simultaneously tense and strangely comforted. "There," she pointed to a barely visible path between 2 rock formations. "It follows the creek for about 6 miles, then cuts northeast through the pine forest." Matthew brought the horse to a stop, surveying the terrain. "This could save us considerable trouble." "How do you know about this place?" Nelly was quiet for a moment. "My father brought me here when I was younger. He was a mapmaker before we settled in Copper Creek." "You must miss him," Matthew said softly. The simple acknowledgement of her loss broke something loose. "Every day," she admitted, surprised at the tightness in her throat. "He taught me to read the land, find water, identify safe paths. Said a woman should know how to navigate her own way." "Sounds like a wise man," Matthew replied. "Raised a capable daughter." As they rode back to town, Nelly found herself sharing more stories about her father's map-making expeditions, her mother's garden, and the life they'd planned before illness took them both within months of each other. She hadn't spoken of them in years, keeping their memory tightly guarded in her heart. Matthew listened attentively, occasionally sharing his own stories of growing up on a small farm, of 4 younger siblings, and parents who believed in hard work and kindness in equal measure. His dream was to establish his own ranch someday, a place where his aging parents could live out their days in comfort. Why are you being so kind to me? Nellie finally asked as they approached town. Matthew was quiet for a moment. My sister worked in a place like the cafe back home. Came home exhausted, feet swollen, sometimes in tears from how men treated her. I promised myself I'd never be the kind of man who forgets that everyone deserves dignity. He paused. And if I'm being honest, Miss Edwards, I find myself thinking about your smile long after I've left the cafe each day. The confession hung in the air between them, sincere and undemanding. For the first time in years, Nellie felt a crack form in the protective wall around her heart. 2 days later, as Matthew's crew prepared to move the herd through the pass Nellie had shown them, he appeared at the cafe during her afternoon break. Miss Edwards, he began, then smiled. Nellie, if I may, would you do me the honor of having dinner with me tonight? And before you say you're too busy, I've already asked Otto, who insists you deserve an evening off. Nellie should have said no. Getting attached to a man who would ride out of town in days made no sense. And yet, yes, she heard herself say, I would like that. That evening, Matthew escorted her to the hotel restaurant, the finest establishment in Copper Creek. He'd clearly made arrangements in advance. Their table was by the window, with a small vase of wildflowers as a centerpiece. But what truly stunned Nellie was when Matthew pulled out her chair, then placed a napkin in her lap before moving to his own seat. When the waiter approached, Matthew ordered for both of them only after confirming her preferences. You look surprised, he noted as the waiter departed. I'm used to being on the other side of this exchange, she admitted. It feels strange to be waited on. But not unpleasant, I hope? Nellie smiled, genuinely this time. No, not unpleasant at all. Their conversation flowed easily through dinner, from childhood memories to books they'd read, to dreams deferred. Nellie found herself speaking of things she'd buried deep. Her hope to someday open a small library in town, her love of drawing maps like her father had taught her. Why haven't you pursued it? Matthew asked. Dreams are luxuries, she said automatically, then paused. At least, that's what I've told myself since my parents died. Survival comes first. Matthew reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Survival without dreams is just existing, Nellie. Your father wouldn't want that for you. His words struck her like physical blows. Had she been merely existing these past years? The realization brought unexpected tears to her eyes. I'm sorry, Matthew said immediately. I spoke out of turn. No, Nellie shook her head. You spoke the truth. As they walked back to her quarters above the cafe under a canopy of stars, Matthew stopped suddenly. I leave in 2 days, he said, his voice low and serious. But I find myself not wanting to go. Nellie's heart quickened. Your cattle? Yes, I have responsibilities. But, he took her hand gently. I haven't felt this way about anyone before. May I write to you, Nellie? And perhaps, when I return this way after the sale. Hope and fear warred within her. Matthew, I don't know if I can. I'm not asking for promises, he said quickly. Just possibility. Possibility. Such a dangerous, beautiful word. Yes, she whispered. You may write. His smile was worth the risk she'd taken. As they said goodnight, Matthew leaned down and placed the gentlest of kisses on her cheek, a gesture so tender it brought fresh tears to her eyes long after he'd gone. The next morning brought shocking news. A flash flood had hit the North Valley, washing away part of Crawford Pass, the very route Matthew's herd would have taken if not for Nellie's guidance. Several travelers had been caught in the deluge. There were reports of casualties. Matthew appeared at the cafe, face grim. Your knowledge likely saved my men and cattle, he told her quietly. I don't know how to thank you. The realization that she had made a real difference, had potentially saved lives, shifted something fundamental in Nellie's perception of herself. Perhaps she wasn't as powerless as she'd believed. That evening, as Nellie served dinner, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts and the thunder of hooves drew everyone to the windows. A group of rough-looking men had ridden into town. The notorious Riker gang, whispered one of the locals. They'd been terrorizing settlements along the cattle routes, stealing herds, and worse. Matthew stood immediately. They must have heard about our herd. I need to warn my men. Wait, Nellie grabbed his arm. There are 6 of them, and they're armed. You can't just. My men are camped with 3,000 head of cattle. If those outlaws get to them first. His eyes met hers, apology and determination mixed. I have to go. Before she could protest further, he was gone. Nelly paced the cafe as minutes stretched to an hour. Outside, the Rikers were drinking heavily at the saloon across the street. Their reputation for violence and cruelty preceded them. When one of Matthew's younger cowboys burst through the door, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, Nelly's heart nearly stopped. "They ambushed the boss on his way back to camp," the young man gasped. "Got him pinned down in the old mill. Sent me for help, but the sheriff's out of town and no one will stand against the Rikers." Nelly's mind raced. The old mill was just outside town, an isolated spot perfect for an ambush. Without thinking twice, she ran to the kitchen, grabbing Otto's shotgun from beneath the counter. "Nelly," Otto called after her. "What are you doing?" "Something besides just surviving," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. The night air was cool against her face as Nelly crept toward the abandoned mill, guided by moonlight and memory. The sound of male voices carried on the wind, rough, threatening. Then Matthew's voice, defiant despite its strained quality. "You won't get my herd, Riker. My men are already moving them to safety." A harsh laugh. "Then I reckon we'll just have to settle for teaching you a lesson instead." Nelly positioned herself behind a stack of weathered lumber, shotgun ready. She'd never fired at a person before, but her father had taught her to hunt. The weight of the gun was familiar in her hands. Taking a deep breath, she fired into the air. The blast echoed like thunder in the confined space. "The next shot won't be a warning," she called out, her voice remarkably steady. "The sheriff and his deputies are right behind me. Drop your weapons and step away from him." A moment of stunned silence followed, then one of the men laughed. "It's just some woman. Probably can't even aim that thing." Nelly fired again, this time splintering a wooden beam inches from the speaker's head. "Care to test that theory?" The momentary confusion gave Matthew the opening he needed. Despite a bleeding wound on his arm, he lunged for his revolver, which had been kicked just out of reach. What followed was a blur of motion and sound. Two of the Rikers fled immediately. Another rushed Nelly, but she swung the shotgun like a club, connecting with his jaw. The fourth man grappled with Matthew, only to find himself staring down the barrel of Matthew's recovered weapon. "It's over, Riker," Matthew said to the leader, who stood frozen between them. "Go now, and don't come back to Copper Creek." For a tense moment, Nelly thought the outlaw would refuse. Then, with a curse, he backed toward the door. "This ain't finished, cowboy," he spat. "Watch your back on the trail." When they were alone, Matthew sagged against a post, his face pale beneath the grime. "Nelly, that was the bravest and most foolhardy thing I've ever seen." She was shaking now, the adrenaline ebbing. "I couldn't just wait for you to die. Come here," he said softly, opening his uninjured arm. Nelly stepped into his embrace without hesitation, the shotgun clattering forgotten to the floor. His heart hammered against her cheek, vital and alive. "Why would you risk yourself like that for me?" he murmured into her hair. The answer came with startling clarity. "Because you made me remember that life is meant for more than just surviving." Matthew tilted her face up to his. "Nellie Edwards, I think I'm falling in love with you." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt like coming home. "I think perhaps I am too," she whispered back. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the urgency of those who had glimpsed how fragile life could be. When they finally broke apart, Matthew pressed his forehead to hers. "I have to leave tomorrow," he said, the regret evident in his voice. Reality crashed back. Tomorrow he would ride away, taking the cattle to market hundreds of miles away. Nelly stepped back, old fears resurging. "Of course," she said, her voice cooling. "You have responsibilities." Matthew's expression turned serious. "Yes, I do. To my men, to the cattle owner. But also," he took her hands in his, "to my heart. Nelly, come with me." The invitation stunned her. "What? Come with me to Santa Fe? I can't bear the thought of leaving you behind." The temptation was overwhelming, but Nelly shook her head. "I can't just leave. Otto depends on me, and this town, it's all I have left." Pain flickered across Matthew's face, but he nodded. "I understand. Then I'll come back for you. After the cattle are delivered, I'll return. If you'll wait for me." How many times had people promised to return, only to disappear from her life? Her parents hadn't meant to leave her, but they had. Why should she believe this man she'd known for barely a week? "How can I trust that?" she whispered. Matthew reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a compass, battered but still functional. This was my grandfather's. It's guided me across 1,000 miles of wilderness. I want you to keep it until I return. Matthew, 3 months, he said firmly. I'll be back in 3 months to the day. And if I'm not, he swallowed hard. Then you'll know something prevented me, and you should move on with your life. But Nelly, if there is breath in my body, I will return to you. The next morning, as Matthew's cattle drive departed, Nelly stood on the cafe porch, the compass clutched in her hand. He'd insisted she keep it even when she'd tried to refuse. So you'll know I'm finding my way back to you, he'd said. As the dust settled on the trail, Nelly returned to her work, the compass now hanging from a chain around her neck. Days passed, then weeks. She wrote down stories her father had told her about local trails and landmarks, discovering she remembered more than she thought. She began sketching simple maps of the area, finding comfort in the familiar activity. 1 month after Matthew's departure, Otto suffered a bad fall, breaking his hip. The doctor was grim. At his age, recovery would be slow, if it came at all. The cafe would have to close. I'm sorry, girl, Otto said from his sickbed. I know this place was your security. Nelly sat beside him, surprising herself with her calm. We'll figure something out. That night, fingering the compass around her neck, Nelly made a decision. The next morning, she visited the bank manager. I'd like to inquire about purchasing the cafe, she said firmly. The man's eyebrows rose. You, Miss Edwards? That's a considerable undertaking for a young woman alone. I'm not looking for opinions, Mr. Bailey, just information. 2 months after Matthew's departure, Nelly became the proud but terrified owner of the Frontier Cafe. She hired 2 local girls to help with serving and convinced Otto to move into the small room off the kitchen so she could care for him while he recovered. She made changes, adding a small bookshelf where customers could borrow or exchange books, posting her hand-drawn maps of local trails for travelers, and introducing her mother's recipes to the menu. Business improved as word spread of the good food and helpful information available. But as the 3rd month began, anxiety gnawed at her. Would Matthew return as promised? And if he did, what then? Her life had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. She was no longer just surviving. She was building something of her own. 3 days before Matthew's promised return date, disaster struck. The Riker gang returned in the night, setting fire to the livery stable in revenge against the town that had defied them. As citizens formed a bucket brigade, the outlaws struck the undefended businesses on the main street, including the cafe. Nelly woke to smoke and the crash of breaking glass. Helping Otto to safety, she watched in horror as flames engulfed the building that represented both her past and her future. By dawn, half the town lay in smoking ruins. No lives had been lost, but livelihoods had been destroyed. Nelly sat on a crate across from the charred remains of the cafe, Otto beside her, both covered in soot and despair. All that work, she whispered. All that hope. Otto patted her hand. Buildings can be rebuilt, girl. With what money? I put everything I had into buying the place from you. The townspeople gathered to assess the damage and begin cleanup efforts. Neighbors offered shelter to those displaced, including Nelly and Otto. But the future looked bleak. The sheriff had organized a posse to pursue the Rikers, but the damage was done. That night, huddled in the back room of the general store where several displaced families were sheltering, Nelly clutched Matthew's compass, tears flowing freely for the first time since her parents' deaths. She had allowed herself to hope again, to dream, to build, and once more, it had all been taken away. The appointed day of Matthew's promised return came and went with no sign of him. Nelly told herself it was for the best. What would he return to now? Her life was in shambles, the cafe gone. Perhaps it was a sign that she'd been right all along. The frontier was no place for dreams. On the 4th day after Matthew should have returned, Nelly was helping clear debris from the cafe site when the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. A sizable group was riding into town, too many to be the sheriff's posse returning. Fear rippled through the gathered townspeople. Had the Rikers returned with reinforcements? Nelly squinted against the sun, then felt her heart leap into her throat. At the head of the column rode a familiar figure. Matthew. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, scanning the destruction with disbelief. When his eyes found her, standing amidst the ruins of the cafe, he ran to her. Nelly, thank God you're alive. His arms encircled her, solid and real. We heard about the attack 2 days ride out. I've been pushing hard to get here. She clung to him, torn between joy at his return and shame at her circumstances. You're late, she managed, her voice muffled against his chest. I know. The cattle sale took longer than expected, and then he pulled back to look at her. None of that matters now. What happened here? As Nellie explained about the Rikers' revenge, Matthew's expression darkened. Those bastards. They followed through on their threat. You came back, Nellie said wonderingly. Even though you were delayed, you still came. I promised I would. He touched the compass still hanging around her neck. I'll always find my way back to you, Nellie. Only then did Nellie notice the wagons that had accompanied Matthew into town. At least a dozen, loaded with lumber, tools, and supplies. What is all this? She asked. Matthew smiled. The cattle sale went better than expected. I convinced the buyers to invest in rebuilding efforts here. They rely on towns like Copper Creek to support the cattle industry. And he hesitated. I had another reason for the delay. He reached into his coat and withdrew an official-looking document. I filed a land claim 20 miles south of here. Prime grazing land with a natural spring. Enough acres to start a modest ranch. Nellie's mind whirled, trying to make sense of what he was saying. The thing is, Matthew continued, his voice softening, a ranch needs a heart to make it a home. I was hoping, that is, if you're willing. To Nellie's astonishment, Matthew knelt in the ashes of her cafe, taking her soot-stained hands in his. Nellie Edwards, these past 3 months showed me what I've known since I first saw you. That you are the strongest, most capable woman I've ever met. You deserve not just to be waited on, but to be loved, honored, and cherished for all your days. His voice broke slightly. Will you marry me and build a life with me? Not because you need saving, but because together we could create something beautiful. The citizens of Copper Creek, gathered to witness this unexpected moment, held their collective breath. Otto wiped a tear from his weathered cheek. Nellie looked at the man kneeling before her. The man who had kept his promise, who had returned for her, who saw her strength rather than just her vulnerability. Around them, the town lay in ruins. Yet here was Matthew, offering not rescue but partnership, not security alone but the chance to dream together. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes. As Matthew rose to embrace her, cheers erupted from the onlookers. He kissed her deeply, uncaring of the audience, then pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, Nellie Edwards. Soon to be Nellie Harding. I love you too, she replied, the words no longer frightening but liberating. But Matthew, the cafe. We'll rebuild it, he said firmly. And the ranch too. Together. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Nellie stood on the porch of a sturdy new ranch house overlooking rolling grasslands. Behind her, Matthew wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. Happy? He asked, his breath warm against her ear. Nellie leaned back against his chest, taking in the view. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. Closer in, the foundation was being laid for a small schoolhouse, Matthew's idea, to serve the growing number of families settling in the area. In town, the rebuilt Frontier Cafe thrived under the management of Otto's nephew, with Nellie's maps prominently displayed on its walls. Twice a month, she rode in to check the books and deliver fresh supplies. The rest of her time was divided between helping with the ranch and working on her first proper atlas of the region, commissioned by a publisher in Denver. Extraordinarily happy, she answered truthfully. And you? Matthew turned her in his arms, his eyes still holding the same warmth that had first broken through her defenses. I have everything I ever dreamed of and more. Their kiss was interrupted by the arrival of a rider, the youngest of Matthew's Cowboys, bringing news that the new bull had arrived from Kansas City. Duty calls, Matthew sighed, but his smile was contented. Dinner at 7? I'll wait on you tonight, Nellie promised with a meaningful smile. It had become their private joke and promise, taking turns caring for each other, neither solely the server nor the served. As Matthew rode out to inspect the new bull, Nellie touched the compass that still hung around her neck. It had guided Matthew back to her, but she now understood it represented something more profound. The courage to navigate by one's own heart, to chart a course toward love rather than away from pain. The frontier remained as harsh and unforgiving as ever, but Nellie had discovered what her parents had known and what Matthew had helped her remember, that its challenges were better faced together, and that even in the Wild West, love could create islands of peace, purpose, and joy. She picked up her pencil and returned to her mapping. Not just surviving anymore, but truly living and loving. Against all odds, against her deepest fears, against the cruel indifference of the frontier itself, Nellie Edwards Harding had found her way home.